I stand here for my parents, Faith Robinson declares, her voice like a knife cutting through prejudice at the University of Pennsylvania's graduation ceremony. Her deep brown skin shines, her long black hair a crown of defiance, as she faces a room overwhelmed by her intelligence and her boyfriend's family who belittle her heritage. Will Faith's courage shatter their prejudices? Or will love and legacy collide in heartbreak? This is a story of triumph you won't soon forget. Where are you listening? Philly, Paris, or beyond? Leave your predictions in the comments. How will Faith rise? Hit the subscribe button to see our latest stories of resilience and share where you're watching. Will Faith overcome the poison of rejection? Will her truth change the world? Tune in to find out. This journey will grip you to the end. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. The University of Pennsylvania's quadrangle pulsed with life under the May 2021 sun, its ancient ivy clinging to stone walls like whispered secrets. Graduates in navy gowns swirled through the crowd, their laughter a bright thread weaving. Through the scent of blooming magnolias, Faith Robinson stood apart, a vision of unyielding grace. Her deep brown skin glowed with a warmth that rivaled the midday light, and her long, glossy black hair cascaded in soft waves down her back, shimmering like a river under starlight. At 25, she was no ordinary graduate. She was the valedictorian of Penn's renowned pharmacology program, a trailblazer in vaccine research, whose brilliance had carved her name into the annals of the university. Her emerald green dress, peeking from beneath her gown, was a quiet rebellion against the muted tones around her, a declaration of her vibrant spirit. Today she would deliver the commencement address, her words poised to ripple beyond the stone arches, a testament to her journey and the sacrifices of those who lifted her here. Faith's fingers grazed the note cards tucked in her pocket, each word of her speech a carefully woven thread in a tapestry of resilience. She had spent weeks crafting it, each sentence a tribute to her parents, Keith and Helen Robinson, whose tireless labor had paved her path. Keith, a factory worker with calloused hands and a heart of iron, had worked grueling shifts to fund her dreams. Helen, a cleaner who scrubbed floors by night, had taught Faith to stand tall against a world that often judged her skin before her mind. Growing up in a modest Philadelphia neighborhood, Faith had faced teachers who doubted her potential, classmates who whispered about affirmative action, and a society that questioned her place in elite spaces. Yet here she stood, at the pinnacle of her class, her heart a steady drumbeat of pride. She was ready to claim her moment, to let her voice echo through the ivy-clad halls. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her reverie. A text from Grayson Miller, her boyfriend of 2 years, lit up the screen. "You're gonna shine, babe." A smile tugged at her lips, softening the edges of her resolve. Grayson, with his sandy hair and quiet intensity, had been her anchor through late-night lab sessions and coffee-fueled debates over mRNA breakthroughs. Their love had bloomed in the quiet corners of Penn's libraries, a sanctuary of shared dreams and whispered promises. But today was more than her triumph. It was the day her parents would meet Grayson's family, the Millers, a wealthy dynasty whose world of privilege felt galaxies apart from her own. Faith sensed the weight of their expectations, a shadow lurking beneath Grayson's assurances that they'd embrace her. She scanned the quadrangle, her heart quickening as she spotted him weaving through the sea of gowns, his gray suit sharp, his smile bright but tinged with nerves. Behind Grayson trailed 2 figures, their polished elegance unmistakable. Leonard Miller, a biotech executive, carried himself with the authority of a man accustomed to boardrooms, his navy suit tailored to perfection. Margaret Miller, her blonde hair swept into a sleek chignon, wore a cream-sheath dress that screamed understated wealth. Their eyes locked on Faith, their smiles tight, appraising her vibrant presence as if she were an anomaly in their carefully curated world. Faith's pulse quickened, but she steadied herself, her long hair gleaming like a cascade of defiance. Grayson reached her first, pulling her into a quick embrace, his cedar cologne a fleeting comfort. "You look stunning," he whispered, his voice warm but laced with unease. "Ready for this?" Faith nodded, her eyes searching his for reassurance. "As I'll ever be," she said, her tone light but her heart bracing for the encounter. "Faith, a pleasure," Margaret said, stepping forward, her handshake brief, her fingers barely grazing Faith's. Her voice was smooth but cool, like polished marble. "That dress is striking, very bold for today. Very bold for—" The word bold landed like a veiled barb, implying Faith's vibrancy clashed with their refined world. Faith's jaw tightened, but she kept her smile steady, her training as a debater in lecture halls serving her well. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller," she replied evenly. "I wanted to honor the occasion." Leonard's nod was curt, his eyes scanning her like a balance sheet. "Grayson mentioned you," he said, his tone flat, almost clinical. "Valedictorian, impressive. Must have been quite the climb." The implication stung, as if her success was a fluke, a lucky break rather than the product of relentless work. Faith straightened, her hair a flowing testament to her poise. "It was," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Top of the class, takes dedication, but I'm no stranger to it." The air grew heavy, charged with unspoken judgment. Margaret's lips curved, but her eyes were cold, assessing Faith's emerald dress, her radiant skin, as if they were evidence of her audacity to stand out. Leonard's gaze lingered, his silence a wall of skepticism. Faith had faced such coded slights before, professors who questioned her citations, peers who assumed she was a diversity quota. But this was different. These were Grayson's people, the family she'd hoped might welcome her into their fold. She glanced at Grayson, expecting a spark of defense, but he shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking to his parents. "We should head to the auditorium," he said, his voice soft, deflecting. The absence of his support was a quiet wound, crack in the foundation of their love. As the crowd began to file toward the auditorium, Faith adjusted her gown, her long hair catching the sunlight like a beacon of resolve. The Miller's scorn was a shadow, but she refused to let it dim. Her light. Her speech was her weapon, a chance to show the world and Grayson's family who she was. Keith and Helen were waiting somewhere in the crowd, their modest attire a stark contrast to the Miller's polish, their love her unshakable anchor. The quadrangle's magnolias swayed in the breeze, their petals a silent cheer for her moment. Faith lifted her chin, her heart a furnace of determination. This was her day, and no one, not even the Millers, could steal it. But as she stepped forward, a question lingered, sharp and unyielding. Would Grayson stand by her if the Millers' subtle venom grew sharper? The answer lay ahead, in the hours that would test her strength and the love they'd built. The University of Pennsylvania's quadrangle faded into a blur of navy gowns as Faith Robinson's parents, Keith and Helen, stepped into view, their presence a quiet anchor in the storm brewing around her. Keith's worn suit hung slightly loose on his broad frame, the fabric creased from years of use, while Helen's simple floral dress swayed gently, her face etched with pride tempered by caution. Faith's heart swelled at the sight of them, her long, glossy black hair catching the May sunlight as she introduced them to Grayson's parents, Leonard and Margaret Miller. "Mom, Dad, this is Mr. and Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice warm but laced with vigilance. The air crackled with unspoken tension, the Miller's polished elegance a stark contrast to the Robinsons' unassuming grace. Leonard's handshake was a fleeting brush, his eyes barely meeting Keith's. Margaret offered a nod, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Charming," she said, the word dripping with condescension, her gaze flicking over Helen's dress like it was an offense to her refined sensibilities. The crowd surged toward the auditorium, but Margaret's voice cut through the hum, sharp and deliberate, loud enough for Faith to catch every syllable. "A factory worker and a cleaner? Honestly, Grayson, what were you thinking?" Leonard's low chuckle followed, a blade wrapped in velvet. "She's bright, I'll give her that. But this match, it's a stretch." Faith's heart clenched, a visceral pain searing through her chest. She glanced at her parents, their faces tightening, their eyes heavy with the weight of enduring such slights for her sake. Keith squeezed Helen's hand, his calloused fingers a silent vow of resilience. Helen's lips pressed into icom, a thin line, her dignity a shield against the miller's scorn. Faith's pulse roared, her long hair swaying as she turned to Grayson, her eyes pleading for him to speak, to name the venom in his parents' words. But he only muttered, "Let's get to the ceremony," his gaze skittering away, his silence a betrayal that cut deeper than any insult. Inside the auditorium, the air thrummed with anticipation, the high ceiling swallowing the murmurs of 1,000 guests. Faith stood backstage, her emerald green dress shimmering beneath her navy gown, her long hair a glossy crown framing her radiant brown skin. The miller's words burned like embers in her chest, but she channeled the pain into resolve, her note cards steady in her hands. She had faced prejudice before, professors who dismissed her research, classmates who whispered about affirmative action, but this was personal, a wound aimed at her parents, her roots, her very existence. The stage was her battleground, her speech a sword to carve her truth. The dean's voice boomed through the speakers. Faith Robinson, our valedictorian, whose brilliance in vaccine research sets a new standard. Applause erupted, a wave of sound that buoyed her as she stepped into the spotlight, her heels clicking with purpose, her hair catching the light like a halo of defiance. Faith scanned the crowd, finding Grayson in the front row, his sandy hair a beacon, his smile weak beside his parents' rigid postures. Margaret's cream dress gleamed, her lips a thin line of disapproval. Leonard's gaze was a cold ledger, assessing her as if she were a risky investment. Faith's chest tightened, but she refused to shrink. "Today, we celebrate courage," she began, her voice clear and resonant, a melody of conviction that filled the vast space. "I stand here because of my parents, Keith and Helen Robinson, who worked grueling hours to give me this chance. They taught me to love my roots, my skin, my heritage, no matter who tries to dim that light." Her words wove a tapestry of her journey, from a modest Philadelphia street to the forefront of mRNA research, a girl who turned doubt into fuel. She spoke of late nights in the lab, of breakthroughs that could save lives, of a world that judged her skin before her mind. The audience leaned in, captivated by her cadence, her passion a living flame. A professor in the wings nodded, her silver hair glinting with approval. A classmate in the third row wiped a tear, her hand trembling. Faith's voice rose, her long hair swaying as she gestured, each word a declaration of her worth. "Pharmacology is my weapon to heal a world that often wounds. I carry my parents' sacrifices, my community's strength, and my own fire. I'm proud of who I am, every part of me." The auditorium erupted, a standing ovation shaking the rafters, the sound a thunderclap of affirmation. Faith's heart soared, her brown skin radiant under the spotlight, her hair a cascade of triumph. She had claimed this moment, her truth echoing beyond the ivy-clad walls. But as she stepped off the stage, her eyes sought Grayson, hoping to share this victory. He clapped, pride flickering in his gaze, but his parents' applause was perfunctory, their faces unyielding. Margaret's lips remained a tight seam, her fingers clutching her purse. Leonard's nod was curt, his eyes unreadable. Faith descended to the floor, her gown rustling, her heart a tangle of triumph and ache. The miller's silence was a blade, slicing through her moment. She approached Grayson, her hair gleaming, her voice soft but searching. "Did you feel that?" she asked, hoping he'd seen her strength. But Margaret's voice cut through, sharp and deliberate. "She's articulate, I'll give her that," she said to Leonard, loud enough to sting. "But so idealistic it won't last in the real world." The words landed like a slap, reducing Faith's triumph to a performance, her blackness a prop in their dismissal. Faith's fingers curled into her palms, her resolve hardening like steel. The Millers hadn't just insulted her. They'd targeted her parents, their sacrifices, their love. Keith and Helen stood nearby, their faces composed but their eyes heavy, their silence a sacrifice for her happiness. Faith looked to Grayson, her gaze burning with a silent demand. "Say something." But he shifted, his hand brushing hers without conviction, his silence louder than the crowd's applause. The auditorium's lights dimmed, the air thick with the weight of prejudice, and Faith knew this moment was only the beginning. Her speech had shaken the room, but the Millers' scorn was a storm gathering strength, and Grayson's inaction was a crack in the foundation of their love. The University of Pennsylvania's auditorium reverberated with the fading echoes of a standing ovation, the air charged with the electricity of Faith Robinson's commencement speech. Her words still hung like a constellation, illuminating the vast space, but as she descended the stage, her emerald green dress shimmering beneath her navy gown, the weight of the Miller family's disdain pressed against her triumph. Faith's long, glossy black hair swayed like a cascade of midnight, framing her radiant brown skin, her presence a beacon of unyielding strength. The crowd swirled around her, classmates offering congratulations, their voices a warm tide. But Faith's eyes sought Grayson Miller, her boyfriend, hoping to share this fleeting victory. In the front row, his sandy hair caught the light, his clap fierce but his smile strained, shadowed by his parents' rigid postures. Margaret Miller's cream dress gleamed like a cold blade, her lips a tight seam. Leonard Miller's applause was a mere formality, his gaze a ledger of skepticism. Faith's heart, still soaring from the crowd's roar, faltered as Margaret stood, her voice slicing through the din. "Grayson, darling, let's get a family photo by the stage. Just us." She gestured to Leonard, her eyes sliding past Faith and her parents, Keith and Helen Robinson, as if they were ghosts in her pristine world. The words were a deliberate cut, a declaration that Faith and her family, her father in his worn suit, her mother in her simple floral dress, did not belong in their frame. Keith and Helen stood nearby, their faces composed, but their eyes heavy with the pain of enduring such slights for Faith's sake. Their hands clasped tightly, a silent vow of dignity, their sacrifice a shield for her happiness. Faith's breath caught, her long hair swaying as she froze, the auditorium's warmth turning to ice around her. Grayson hesitated, his hand half reaching for Faith, his gray suit rumpled by his indecision. "Mom, Faith should be in it," he said, his voice soft, almost pleading. Margaret's laugh was brittle, a shard of glass. "Oh, darling, we need one for the family album. Faith has her people to pose with." The phrase, "her people," was a venomous barb, relegating Faith and her parents to an outsider's place, their blackness a barrier to the Millers' polished legacy. Leonard's nod was curt, his silence an endorsement of the exclusion. Faith's pulse roared, her fingers curling around her diploma, the leather case grounding her against the sting. She had just commanded a room of scholars, her speech a blazing testament to her worth. Yet here she was, reduced to an interloper in the eyes of the family she'd hoped might embrace her. Faith's eyes locked on Grayson, her gaze a silent demand for courage for him to name the prejudice cloaked in his mother's words. But he shifted, his jaw clenching, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's just a photo, Faith. We'll take more later." The compromise was a surrender, a crack in the foundation of their love that widened with every silent second. Faith's heart sank, a stone plummeting into a dark well. She turned to her parents, their quiet dignity a mirror to her own. Keith's weathered face held a flicker of pain, Helen's eyes glistening with unspoken pride. They had endured worse. Years of slights, of scraping by to give Faith this moment. But this wound was fresh, inflicted by the family tied to the man she loved. Faith's resolve hardened, her long hair a cascade of defiance, each strand catching the auditorium's light like a vow. The crowd continued to swirl, classmates hugging, professors nodding, but Faith felt the weight of the Millers' rejection like a storm cloud. She led Grayson away from the chaos, her heels clicking on the stone path as they reached the quadrangle's oak trees, their branches casting dappled shadows. The air was thick with the scent of magnolias, but it couldn't soften the tension between them. Faith faced him, her brown skin radiant even in the shade, her hair flowing like a river of strength. "Grayson," she said, her voice low but firm, each word carved with precision. Your family insulted me, my parents, my very existence. They mocked the people who raised me, who sacrificed everything. And you stood there, silent. Her eyes burned, searching his for a spark of conviction, but his face crumpled, his hands fidgeting. Faith, I'll talk to them, he stammered, his voice pleading. I didn't want a scene, not today. But Faith shook her head, her hair swaying like a curtain closing on their shared dreams. It's not about a scene, Grayson. It's about courage. You didn't choose me today, didn't defend my family when they were humiliated. I love you, but I love myself and my parents more. I won't let anyone demean them or me again. Her words were a gavel, final and unyielding. Grayson's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing his face. Faith, please, we can fix this, he said, reaching for her hand. But she stepped back, her diploma clutched tightly, her heart a fortress. We're done, she said, her voice steady despite the ache tearing through her. The breakup was a wound, raw and searing, but Faith's spirit stood tall, unbroken. She returned to her parents, their arms opening like a sanctuary. Keith's voice was gruff, his eyes fierce with love. You're enough, Faith. Always have been. Helen's embrace was warm, her tears a quiet hymn of pride. We're so proud, she whispered, her floral dress soft against Faith's gown. Faith hugged them tightly, her long hair framing a face alight with resolve, her heart anchored by their love. The quadrangle's oaks whispered in the breeze, their leaves a chorus of strength, echoing her refusal to bow. The miller's scorn had tried to dim her light, but Faith was a flame, unextinguished, her parents' sacrifices a fire that burned within her. As the crowd dispersed, she lifted her chin, her hair catching the sunlight, ready to face a future where her worth would never be questioned again. The Johns Hopkins laboratory gleamed under sterile lights, its sleek surfaces humming with the pulse of discovery in late 2022. Faith Robinson stood at its heart, her deep brown skin radiant, her long, glossy black hair flowing like a river of strength, unbound and shimmering in the clinical glow. At 27, she was no longer just the valedictorian of Penn's pharmacology program. She was a global beacon, her name synonymous with a revolutionary mRNA vaccine that had slashed Covid-19 variant infections, saving millions. Her tailored blazer hugged her frame, a sharp contrast to the emerald green dress of her graduation day 18 months ago. But her spirit burned with the same fire. Journal covers bore her face, her hair a cascade of defiance, her eyes alight with purpose. Today she prepared to return to the University of Pennsylvania as a guest professor, her lectures a magnet for students hungry to learn from a legend who had reshaped the world. The scars of that commencement day lingered, a quiet ache beneath her triumphs. The Miller family's scorn, Grayson's silence, the pain in her parents' eyes, Keith's weathered hands, Helen's floral dress, had forged a steel core within her. Faith had walked away from Grayson, choosing her worth and her family, over a love that faltered under prejudice. Now, as she packed her notes for Penn, her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. Proud of you always. Keep shining. Faith's lips curved, her heart warmed by Helen's words, a balm for the wounds of that day. Keith and Helen had watched her graduation speech online, their tears a silent rebuke to the Miller's disdain. They had raised her to stand tall, and Faith carried their faith like a shield, her long hair a crown of resilience. The University of Pennsylvania's quadrangle greeted her like an old friend, its ivy-clad walls whispering memories under the crisp autumn sun of 2022. Faith stepped onto the stone paths, her blazer sharp, her hair flowing like a banner of victory. Students parted as she passed, their whispers a chorus of awe. That's Faith Robinson, the vaccine pioneer. The dean met her at the lecture hall, his handshake warm, his eyes gleaming with pride. You've done us proud, Faith, he said, gesturing to the packed auditorium awaiting her first lecture. The room buzzed with anticipation, students clutching notebooks, their faces a tapestry of ambition and admiration. Faith adjusted her notes, her hair catching the stage lights, her presence commanding even before she spoke. She was no longer the girl who faced the Miller's venom. She was a force, her brilliance undeniable, her roots a source of power. As she stepped to the podium, her gaze swept the crowd, and there, in the back, she spotted Grayson Miller. His sandy hair was unchanged, but his eyes carried a weight of regret, his gray sweater a muted echo of the suit he'd worn that fateful day. Faith's heart flickered, not with longing but with clarity. She had outgrown him. Her light, too. Bright for his shadow, he lingered as the lecture began, her voice a melody of conviction, weaving stories of her vaccine's creation. Late nights in the lab, breakthroughs born of grit, the lives saved by her team's relentless pursuit. Students leaned forward, some scribbling furiously, others rapt, a young woman in the front row wiping a tear. Faith's hair swayed as she gestured, her words a call to fight for a world that heals. The applause was thunderous, a standing ovation that shook the rafters, affirming her place among giants. After the lecture, Grayson approached, his steps hesitant, his voice soft. "Faith, I was wrong," he said, his eyes searching hers. "I should have stood up for you, for your parents. I've been trying to unlearn everything my family taught me." Faith studied him, her hair framing a face serene but distant. "I hope you've learned, Grayson," she said, her tone measured, offering grace but no bridge back to her heart. "I have." She turned away, her hair catching the sunlight, streaming through the hall's windows, her steps carrying her toward a future she'd built alone. The encounter was a whisper of the past, a reminder of the cost of her triumph, but it couldn't dim her radiance. She had chosen herself, her parents, her truth, and that choice had propelled her to this moment. That evening, Faith dined, with Keith and Helen at a small Philadelphia restaurant, its warm lights casting a golden glow over their table. Keith's worn jacket hung on the chair, Helen's simple blouse a quiet elegance. Their laughter filled the air, a melody of love that drowned out the memory of the Miller's scorn. Keith raised a glass, his voice gruff but thick with pride. "To our girl who changed the world." Helen's smile was radiant, her eyes glistening, and never stopped shining. Faith's heart swelled, her long hair framing a face alight with purpose, her hand reaching for theirs. "I'm here. Because of you," she said, her voice a vow. The Millers had mocked their sacrifices, their modest lives, but Keith and Helen were the bedrock of her success, their love the fire that fueled her. The restaurant's hum faded as Faith recounted her work at Johns Hopkins. High-stakes experiments, global accolades, the weight of lives saved. Her vaccine had turned the tide against a relentless virus, her name whispered in Nobel Prize discussions. Yet this moment, with her parents' hands in hers, was her true triumph. The Miller's prejudice had tried to cage her, but Faith had soared, her long hair a testament to her unbroken spirit. As the city's lights glittered outside, Faith knew her journey was far from over. Each case, each lecture, was a step toward justice, a world healed by her hands. She was Faith Robinson, scientist, daughter, warrior, and no shadow could dim her light. The night stretched before her, a canvas of possibility, her parents' love a constellation guiding her forward. The Philadelphia skyline glittered like a mosaic of dreams, its neon pulse reflecting off the Schuylkill River's dark waters. In late 2022, Faith Robinson stood by the river's edge, her tailored blazer sharp against the evening breeze, her long, glossy black hair catching the city's glow like a cascade of starlight. At 27, she was a titan in global health, her mRNA vaccine a beacon that had saved millions from COVID-19's variants. Her deep brown skin radiated resilience, a testament to the trials she'd overcome. Scorn from the Miller family, Grayson's, silence, the weight of a world that judged her before she spoke. Now, as a guest professor at the University of Pennsylvania, her lectures sparked a new generation, her story a flame that refused to be dimmed. Tonight, she carried the love of her parents, Keith and Helen Robinson, like a shield, their sacrifices, the foundation of her unbound legacy. Faith's return to Penn had transformed the campus, her presence a magnet for students who filled lecture halls to hear her speak. Her voice, a melody of conviction, wove tales of science and resilience, urging her students to fight for a world that heals. In her latest lecture, she stood at the podium, her hair flowing like a river of strength, her eyes alight with purpose. "Science isn't just discovery," she said, her words cutting through the auditorium's hush. "It's defiance against doubt, against injustice, against a world that tells you who you can't be." Students leaned forward, notebooks forgotten, their faces a tapestry of awe. A young black woman in the front row nodded fiercely, her eyes mirroring Faith's fire. The applause was thunderous, a standing ovation that echoed the triumph of her graduation speech 18 months ago, now amplified by her global impact. After the lecture, Keith and Helen waited in the wings, their modest attire, Keith's worn jacket, Helen's simple blouse, a quiet contrast to the academic grandeur. Faith rushed to them, her hair swaying, her embrace fierce. "You were incredible," Keith said, his gruff voice thick with pride, his calloused hands gripping hers. Helen's eyes glistened, her smile radiant. "Our girl changing the world," she whispered, her arms a sanctuary. Faith's heart swelled, their love a balm for the scars of that commencement day when the Millers mocked their sacrifices. Keith and Helen had watched her rise, their tears during her online graduation speech a silent rebuke to prejudice. Now their presence at her lecture was a victory, their faith in her a constellation guiding her path. The city's pulse thrummed as Faith reflected on her journey. Her vaccine work had earned her global acclaim, her name whispered in Nobel Prize discussions, her face gracing journal covers. But the true measure of her legacy was in moments like these with her parents, with students who saw themselves in her story. A letter from Grayson Miller had arrived weeks ago, his words raw with regret. "I'm unlearning my family's prejudice, Faith. I failed you." She had read it, then set it aside, her heart closed to him but open to his growth. The Millers' scorn, Margaret's cold smiles, Leonard's dismissive nods, had once threatened to cage her, but Faith had soared, her long hair a banner of defiance, her roots a crown she wore with pride. At a recent community talk, Faith stood before a diverse crowd, her blazer sharp, her hair gleaming under the stage lights. A student asked, "How do you keep going when the world doubts you?" Faith's smile was a spark, her voice steady. "I carry my parents' love, my heritage's fire. No one can deny that." The room erupted, her words a call to rise, to claim one's worth. She shared her journey, from a modest Philly street to Johns Hopkins, from rejection to revolution. Each case she tackled, each life saved, was a brick in her legacy, built on the sacrifices of Keith and Helen, who had scrubbed floors and worked factory shifts to give her this chance. The crowd's cheers were a hymn, affirming her unyielding light. That night, Faith and her parents dined at a small restaurant, its warm lights casting a golden glow over their table. Laughter spilled between them, a melody of love that drowned out the echoes of past wounds. Keith raised a glass, his eyes fierce. "To our Faith unstoppable." Helen's hand squeezed hers, her voice soft. "You've always been our star." Faith's hair framed a face alight with purpose, her heart full. "I'm here because of you," she said, her words a vow etched in the air. The Millers had tried to diminish her, but their prejudice was a shadow against her radiance. She no longer needed their approval. Her worth was her own, forged in fire, tempered by love. As the evening wound down, Faith stepped outside, the Schuylkill River a mirror for her thoughts. Her work at Johns Hopkins continued, new vaccines, new battles. But her true legacy was in the students she inspired, the communities she uplifted. She hosted game nights with friends, planned trips to cities steeped in history, her life a canvas of dreams unbound by the past. The Millers' resistance lingered, Margaret's silence a fortress, Leonard's gestures hollow, but Faith was beyond their reach. Her parents' love, her heritage's strength, had carried her through the crucible of that graduation day. Now she was a warrior, her long hair catching the city's neon pulse, each strand a testament to her resilience. Faith stood tall, her blazer sharp, her eyes tracing the river's flow. The city hummed around her, a symphony of possibility. She was Faith Robinson, scientist, daughter, beacon. Her story a tapestry still weaving, each thread a triumph. The Millers had underestimated her, but their legacy could not dim her light. As the stars emerged above, Faith knew her chapter was far from over, her future a horizon of battles and victories, all rooted in the unbreakable bond with her parents and the fire of her truth. Thank you for joining Faith Robinson's journey of courage and triumph. Her unbreakable spirit reminds us to honor our roots and fight for our worth. What moved you most about her story? How did her resilience inspire you? Drop your thoughts in the comments and share where you're listening from, Philly, Paris, or beyond. Your support fuels these tales. So hit that subscribe button to catch our next story of heart and defiance. Like, comment, and spread the word to keep the fire alive. Until next time, stay bold like Faith, and we'll meet again with another tale that stirs the soul.